what would be most useful for you in our conversation today?
Yeah, so I'm taking your study plan, which, by the way, like heads and toes better than anything else I've ever tried to do on my own. So thank you for that. But I had a few like questions that I thought would be helpful for me because I wanted to get stuff I couldn't find on Google. I'd like to use you as a resource. So I wanted to know, like with reviewing on LR, should I review just like section like 1 through 25, or should I just review by question type initially going forward, starting kind of as a noob with LR?
When it comes to building your foundation, I would start by doing the questions by type so that you could better see the patterns and commonalities associated with each type, so that you know the proper perspective from which to view a question given the question stem. Later, you pull it all together doing individual timed sections where you are getting random things thrown at you all the time, and you can work on staying afloat under those conditions as well as working on your pacing. Does that help?
Yeah, of course. And I just wanted to know, because I'm new to LR and I just kind of like was like, all right, I'm just gonna go day by day. Whatever Steve is throwing at me, I'm gonna do it. So I kind of know a little bit of LR, but it's not a very concrete foundation. So I want to build on that. But I just wanted to know, like those that do really well in LR, obviously are scoring in the 170s and high 160s. What do they do and what do they not do? What do they avoid to do on LR?
I think, and this goes to the LSAT in general, one of the things you got to avoid is what I call the obsessive practice exam narrative, where you take exam after exam and after exam, just obsessively measuring your results, tracking them, and looking for some hidden pattern that's going to unlock everything. I'd rather that you do fewer questions and review them in more detail. The top scorers look to get inside the minds of the test makers to better see the exam from their perspective, to slow down and dissect the toughest problems that gave you trouble, to analyze them in excruciating details, to figure out what tripped you up about the question and how you could avoid that going forward.
Yeah, that was perfect too. And another one of the questions I had was, you talked about, I think in some of your videos, you talked about getting in the mindset of the logic games. And that helped a lot. Just trying to like put forward some of my rules and inferences to see how it would change a game. But I'm not really sure how to do that with logical reasoning. How do I get inside of a test maker's, perspective? You kind of talked a little bit about like advertisements and kind of seeing flaws in reasoning there. But I just kind of wanted to do that like in everyday life and just kind of have a different way of thinking.
Yeah, so in everyday life with arguments there, you want to learn to be more critical and skeptical and really take the literal meaning of what people are saying. Because a lot of times people will speak imprecisely, and that could be by accident if it's friends and family. But then when it comes to arguments you see in the media and politicians and flaws there, it's a whole different story where they're engaging in personal attacks, or they're taking the absence of evidence to be the evidence of absence of evidence. So things like that. But then when it comes to spotting tricks in LSAT questions specifically, what I'm talking about there is thinking about how they're constructing the questions from the beginning. So what made a particular question difficult? It may be that there was the conclusion buried in the middle of the argument, not at the beginning, not at the end where we typically expect to see it. Or they might require you to take the contrapositive of a statement in order to better link together two conditional statements. Or they might use confusing words like unless, except, until, and without. And so a tougher question will involve all of these things and more. An easier question might involve only one trick like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I also see a lot of people that kind of make their own logical reasoning questions on some of the Facebook forums. They're a little confusing, and I know I stayed away from Kaplan just because of that idea, because they make their own questions and they kind of are, they're parallel to LSAT, but they're not completely similar. Is that a good thing to practice? Maybe practice making your own LR questions just for yourself to kind of get in that test mode, or would
you as an exercise, I think it's interesting to explore, but I certainly wouldn't focus on doing fake LSAT questions written by others, because a lot of them are unrealistic and they're not written with the same degree of precision that LSAT requires. I actually know a guy who used to write actual LSAT questions. I've done a number of interviews with him on the YouTube channel and also written interviews as well. And even when he would submit LSAT questions to LSAC, they would reject the majority of them, at least initially.
Wow.
And this was someone they had handpicked and hired who was a philosophy PhD.
Yeah.
And so someone who's teaching the LSAT on the side or a fellow student, they don't have enough exposure to what LSAT questions are really like and what goes into making them. And I know obviously LSAC has strict copyright requirements, and so we can't publish actual questions. And so fake ones often fill that gap, but it's unfortunate because the fake ones aren't nearly as good and they're not close enough to what you'll see on test day. So I would stay away from those.
Sure. And then I just wanted to kind of go forward. I feel really confident with logic games. I haven't touched a single thing on RC yet, just because I understand that, it's going to be like games. You literally have to comprehend reading. So I think for me to do really well in the LSAT, I'm going to have to do really well in logical reasoning. And I just kind of wanted to know I know you have a lot of, it's a very broad question, tips and strategies, but what do you have best advice going forward right now, coming that I'm going to be testing in the next, 4 or 5 months from now?
Sure. So in terms of a study plan, to bring it back there, and I want to comment on something you said initially about taking it in June, July, and August.
Okay.
I get the reasoning of taking it multiple times because through luck alone, you could do a few points better. In fact, I often recommend that. But I wouldn't recommend doing June, July, and August for a couple of reasons. One of them is that there's a new retake limit. You can only take the LSAT 3 times in one admission cycle, and cycles run from June to May. So if you do June, July, August, you've burnt through all 3, and you cannot take the LSAT again until June of the following year.
Okay.
The second reason is that in talking with admissions, a lot of them have said that they want to see you exercising good judgment in terms of when you retake it, that you've done proper preparation in between attempts to make the most of your next attempt. So I might suggest for you do June and August, or do June and July, or do July and August. So any combination of 2, but not 3.
Okay. Yeah, I read about the new cycles and stuff like that. I'm just worried because I'm already going to have to take a gap year because I graduate this May, and I wanted to apply early in October. And just for me to be competitive with such a low GPA, I have like a 3.2. I wanted to kind of get the ball rolling and have everything kind of done by mid-September so I could be ready to hammer something home. But would you suggest doing the October test? If I was going to apply maybe October, maybe a little early in November, does that hurt my chances too much, or?
Not too much, no.
Okay.
Applying early matters much less than it used to, and taking the October LSAT and still applying in November is perfectly reasonable. I would not consider that late by any stretch. And so I would say, if you think you can be reasonably ready by June, take it in June, and then also perhaps take it in August. And then if between those 2 test dates, you don't feel done and you feel like you could still do significantly better, then you might want to add on October as well. But one of the things I like about taking consecutive LSATs, although not 3 consecutive, maximum 2 consecutive, is that you've only got to stay fresh on the LSAT for another 4 weeks or so. And then you could potentially be done after that. And staying fresh might only require doing another timed exam per week and reviewing it. That alone might be enough depending on what your goals are for the retake. But through luck alone, you could do maybe at least 3 points better without even improving your understanding. And if you do improve your understanding, even better.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with, just because, you've got so much going on and there's so much competition. And it's such a significant weight on the LSAT, it just makes more sense to kind of put everything you have into 4 hours, and it kind of trumps, the 4 years of college. So it's weird. It's different. I've talked to a lot of friends in grad school, and they're like, yeah, I took the GMAT, the logical reasoning on that or whatever. It was it was weird. It was hard. And looking at it, I was like, oh, this is a little easier than what I'm doing. But, it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, I
So
mean, the GMAT critical reasoning is like an easier version of LSAT logical reasoning.
yeah, it's kind of funny. And then I show friends and family. I'm like, hey, try this logic game with me. Try this. And when I first started, I was thinking, I was like, man, I was like, these logic games, like these are gonna be the death of me. Now I'm like, oh my god, these are fun. Like before bed, I'm just gonna do one, and just kind of review.
Did you see the
So,
one I posted in the Facebook group today with the Greek deities?
oh no, I haven't. I'll check.
Take a
I'll
look
check
at
that.
that one. It's especially daunting because I chose to write my own logic games where most of the variables contain the same first letter.
Oh yeah. I've looked through that one. I didn't do it because that was like on day 3 of my study plan, and I was like, all right, like I can barely do it with L M N O Q. I can't do it with like A C B C B A. But I'm gonna definitely try it now that I'm kind of a little more mastered in the logic games. But my progress is really well. I like to think it's a lot to do with review, and I've kind of gone on that philosophy that you put out there, and it helps so much because I'll sit there and I'll review for like 2 hours on one logic game, and that's helped me go forward than doing more logic games, if that makes sense. Because
Awesome.
so if I just do logic game after logic game, I'm not learning anything. It's like, all right, but when I go forward and I'm like reviewing these advanced linear games, I'm like, okay, this is where I messed up. And then you kind of see, like, you go into the next logic game. It's not similar, but it's close. And you're like, okay, well, like, and you didn't get caught in that, or you didn't miss that inference or that not law or whatever it is. So it's really helpful. I'm just nervous about LR because it's 50% of the test, and I need to do extremely well in both the sections. So I really kind of need to hammer it home. So, but it's just like another foundation. I'm just going to keep building and then go forward and keep building the logic game section. And then when I get to RC, I'll get to RC, I guess. So
Exactly. And you've already seen the growth you can get from following the study plan with the logic games portion. So
mhm.
just do the same thing with logical reasoning. I mean, we're speaking right now in mid-February. You've still got 3.5 months more
Yeah,
until the June LSAT. And so
yeah,
you can feel comfortable slowing down and taking the time to build the foundation for logical reasoning, working by question type, then pulling it together with individual timed sections, and finally with full-length timed exams as test day approaches.
yeah. And another question I had that's kind of a little off topic from all the questions I wrote out today, but I had a question about like test accommodations. I have
Sure.
a friend, he's going to Chapman. He scored 160 twice. He said that in law school, there's a lot of students that have kind of like, lack of better terms, BS accommodations. They say like this or ADHD or whatever. And he said it was like a really high majority of students that all had to be accommodated. And the law schools, obviously, they can't just not accommodate. But he said they did it for the LSAT too. And like, what do you think kind of accommodations would be like sufficient to like for an accommodation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. So it used to be extremely difficult to get accommodations for the LSAT in terms of getting extra time for things like ADHD. And LSAC was actually strict with all accommodations, period,
Mm-hmm.
leading to a number of different lawsuits. The ultimate outcome is that LSAC has made it much easier to get accommodations for things like extra time for ADHD. And law schools will not know if you received them. It used to be there would be an
Okay.
asterisk next to your score, which would, of course, would lead law schools to take your score with a grain of salt because they knew you got the
Yeah.
boost of extra time. That's no longer the case now. And so if you think you might have reason to qualify for something like ADHD, difficulty focusing, things of that nature,
Mm-hmm.
then you could go to a licensed professional, some sort of doctor who will evaluate you, ask you a series of questions, perhaps, and then possibly grant you accommodations. Accommodations might include getting time and a half, which would be getting 53 minutes per section rather than 35 minutes, or it might involve getting double time, which would lead test day to be at least 6 hours, which might be a little bit too much for anybody.
Yeah, and I know it's hard because there's no ethics portion on this test, which my mentor, she keeps saying I wish they put it in there, and I know it's very unethical to do test accommodations, but I've been having a problem with my eyesight lately and my nearsightedness. I'm having trouble like staring at the words, and I'm getting lost with all the everything blocked together, and so I need to go back to the eye doctor soon. But I just, if it's not going to improve, it's taking me it's taking me an extra 3 to 4 minutes on a logic game, just trying to, find my place and stare at the page. And so I don't know if it's something that I need to be accommodated for, but if I can't finish logic games within a certain amount of time, I can't finish a whole section within 35 minutes, I might have to go, to the doctor and see if there's anything wrong with my eyes, something serious.
Of course. Well, I mean, it would be unethical to seek accommodations if you had no valid reason for doing so. But in your case, from what you're describing to me, it sounds like accommodations could be especially useful for you. And if you get an extra 3 to 4, you said 3 to 4 minutes per game is what you need, times 4 for an entire section. If that were 16 minutes, 35 minutes plus 16 brings you right around that time and a half, 53 minutes or so. So that could be worth looking into. I would explore it. If getting glasses or contacts or LASIK, if none of that resolves this for you and you need something more, then I would certainly look into it. And I would apply sooner rather than later, because LSAC has deadlines and they need time to adjust on their end to make those accommodations for you.
Sure. Yeah, I just, I feel guilty for kind of doing it, but at the same time, I know it's going to be helpful if this keeps going on, because it's just like I'm staring at, and I know it might be fatigue too, staring at pages for, so long, 3-4 hours at a time, but it just worries me because, it's like the more I kind of like put all the stress on me and on all this other stuff and all this pressure, it just kind of like, it makes it so much harder to read that fine print of all these, questions and answer choices all so close to each other. So I don't know if it would be like dyslexia or mild dyslexia or something, but it definitely does take me a lot more longer. So, but yeah, I'm just going to go through your study plan. And I also want to say thank you a lot for taking me today. Thank you a lot for all the free advice you give and all the effort you put in. I did my due diligence of research before I kind of like started. I went through the Facebook forums. They were a good, helpful tool. I visited websites. I looked through like reviews and stuff. So I got to say, like, out of everyone I've looked, you've done your due diligence, and you've been doing this, you've been teaching this test since I was like 8 years old. So it's crazy. So
awesome. Well, I'm really glad I've been able to help you. It's been a pleasure to connect with you, and I'm glad to be part of your LSAT journey. Please let me know if I can help in any way as you move forward. And before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
Okay, so my biggest insight, I gotta say, it was probably with just helping understanding different things on review. Like, it sucks because I feel great on logic games, but logical reasoning, I'm just new, so I don't really know what I'm kind of missing yet, if that makes sense. But I think helping set up this base for review is going to be extremely helpful. And I'm just really excited to hammer home LR already, because it's just so satisfying to keep building and building. So I'm excited for that. And I also wanted to kind of give back to you, because you just do so much, and I think it's incredible. I think it's really awesome. So it makes me feel more encouraged to study. So it's like I bought your study plan. I'm like, hey, like, tell all my friends, I'm like, hey, you need to get the study plan, because like, and it's night and day difference. So because before I was like, all right, I'm gonna start with logical reasoning, because logically it's 50% of the test. And I'm going to start with each question type, and I'm going to put it on my wall, like each question type and notes underneath it. And I was like, and then, you kind of get sidetracked and all this other stuff. But when things are structured, like you put it, it's just, it's like you're falling down the rabbit hole, which is perfect, So it's been a very fun journey so far. I can't wait to actually sit down and test.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.